Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Parallel Systems broadcast. I'm your host, Mike, and on tonight's show, we're going to be talking about the Great Depression 2.0. Yes, my friends, I believe that we are heading into the greatest depression in human history. And not only do I think we're heading into it, I think they are orchestrating it and they're going to make it as deep and painful as possible. And it's going to be used as the pretext either for the final can kick or the switch over to the financial digital control grid. Now, remember just a few years ago when Scott Bessent had this to say: it's Main Street's turn after Wall Street grew wealthy for 4 decades. And here's his actual words from April 2025. For the last 4 decades, basically since I began my career in Wall Street has grown wealthier than ever before, and it can continue to grow and do well. But for the next 4 years, it's Trump's agenda to focus on Main Street. It's Main Street's turn. It's Main Street's turn to hire workers. It's Main Street's turn to drive investment. And it's Main Street's turn to restore the American dream. Well, it all sounded so lovely and wonderful, but of course it was a lie. What we've actually seen over the last 2 years is Main Street has been gutted. Mining has declined. Manufacturing has declined. The real economy has been shedding jobs the entire time. The only sector of the economy that's done well over the last 2 years is healthcare. And that's because it ain't healthcare, it's death care and sickness care. And of course, people are very sick in America. They're psychologically sick, they're physically unhealthy. And lots of people took this thing and now need severe medical interventions because their hearts are blowing up. Of course, the trade war has done tremendous damage to Main Street because the goods that people were importing from China to make products in the US, well, there was massive tariffs put on that. Similarly, now we have this massive inflationary shock. And who's that going to hurt the most? Is it going to hurt the big corporations who can work around sanctions? Of course it isn't. It's going to hurt the everyday man and woman that has to fill up their car with gas prices up 20%. It's going to hurt the people who have to import goods that now have a 20-50% markup on because of the energy inputs. Remember, my friends, when you have an energy shock like this, when people are already struggling, remember, most Americans have less than 1 month's salary in the bank. When you add the energy shock to all of that, yes, it's going to tip the world into a depression. And I think that is the point. If we look at what's been happening over the last 2 years, it's intentional destruction. And we know this because what's happening over in the Strait of Hormuz didn't have to happen. The Strait of Hormuz was open. It was the bombing of Iran that led to it being closed. Now, it's not just in the Strait of Hormuz. We're also seeing energy infrastructure across the world being targeted. In Australia, we had their largest fertilizer plant suddenly develop what the mainstream media called a glitch. It's now offline for 3 months. It could be much longer. And then just a week later, one of the 2 oil refineries suddenly burst into flames. Now, what are the chances, my friends, that the 2 commodities that are being most affected by what's happening in the Middle East are being affected elsewhere in Australia at precisely the same time? I'd say the percentages are 0.00001%. It's extremely improbable, but that's what's happening.
Good evening. Explosions and a massive fireball lit up the night sky in Geelong as a devastating blaze erupted at the crucial Corio oil refinery. The emergency forced workers to run for their lives and could not have come at a worse time, with the facility supplying half of Victoria's fuel. Tom Steinfort is there for us tonight and we'll go to him live now. Tom, how much damage has this fire caused?
Alicia, good evening. Unfortunately, it's the part of this site that produces what Victorians need most right now that has been hit the hardest, and that is the area responsible for making unleaded petrol. Equipment failure, we're being told, is what's to blame at this stage, and production, which was only recently ramped up, has now been cut. Ollie Haig begins our coverage.
In the middle of a fuel crisis, a sight no one wants to see. Explosions ringing out as one of the country's 2 oil refineries goes up in flames.
And so let's have a look at who is benefiting from what's happening. Remember what Scott Bessent said? He said it's Main Street's turn. Well, you can see here, Wall Street banks break records as Iran war drives trading boom. Wall Street's biggest banks smashed records with first quarter earnings that capitalized on the market volatility sparked by the Iran war. JP Morgan Chase reported the highest ever revenues from its trading business, and net income for the bank was second only to 2024 when it received a one-off windfall from the sale of its stake in Visa. Rival Citi posted the best quarterly revenue in a decade and a 42% jump in net income. Combined, JP Morgan, Citi, Wells Fargo reported more than $25 billion of profits in the first 3 months as the bank's traders benefited from sharp moves in markets without higher oil prices hurting US borrowers. Well, my friends, you can see who's winning here, and it isn't you. Did your salary go up 42% like the profits of the big banks? No, it didn't. In fact, you are being taxed because you've got tariffs on the goods coming in, and now you've got an inflationary shock that is going to take us to a new Great Depression. So the winners here is the Wall Street banks. It's the parasitical banks who are also the secured creditors when it comes to the great taking. So those guys cannot lose. And of course, they're getting insider knowledge from people like Scott Bessent, who, let me just remind you, was the right-hand man of George Soros. Also, we've got massive insider trading. Somebody in Trump's team, likely his son or himself, is earning billions of dollars by front-running the tweets that are moving the markets up and down. So what we're actually seeing is a great looting take place. And it's just like during the scamdemic, when trillions of dollars was taken from the bottom 50% and funneled up to the top 0.1%. That was Trump's first presidency. Now in the second presidency, the same thing is happening, only this time they're going for the throat because they're going to take us to a depression. Now in that depression, as I said, most Americans have less than a month's salary in the bank. And what happens when we have food shortages? What happens when we have people that simply cannot afford to pay their mortgage or their bills? Well, it's going to be a catastrophe. Now, I've got this article here that I just wanted to throw into the mix. This is US long-term unemployment hits 4-year high. This is the reality of the labor market in the US, and it says Americans are taking longer to find new jobs than at any other point in the past 4 years as muted hiring deepens concerns about the labor market. Now, this was before the energy shock. This was from February. So imagine what it's like now. And here we have the US minimum wage adjusted for inflation. You can see that right now, the federal minimum wage is the lowest it has been since it began. It's the lowest it's been in 80 years. Inflation adjusted, it's around $2 per hour. So this is how difficult life has become in the US. And now I wanted to share with you some statistics that show the descent of America from 1945, the end of World War II, to where we are today. And this is from my recent article over on Substack called Collapsing the World Economy Ahead of Bretton Woods. And if you haven't read that yet, I suggest you check it out because it goes into some of these things in detail. So let's begin with this one. 1945, the US emerges from World War II with roughly 2/3 of the world gold reserves. That's 2/3. That was around 22,000 tons of gold. Today, China probably has around 40,000 tons, but I don't think the US has 22,000 tons anymore. I'd be surprised if the US even had the stated 8,500 tons. In fact, I think if you go to Fort Knox, you're going to find lots of pieces of paper. Maybe you'll find some bars that are lead painted gold, but you ain't going to find the real gold because that's been taken by the Bank of International Settlements as collateral for the US debt, which is now 39 trillion. Yes, the US has gone from being the largest creditor nation in history to the largest debtor nation in history, and they have ballooned the system to enable this. But yes, the Americans sit atop of that. The dollar has been used to expand the largest debt Ponzi in history. Now let's talk about the collapse of American industry, because this is another one of those narratives that Bessent and Trump have been touting to get MAGA heads to believe that the US is going to somehow regain its supremacy. So listen to this. 1945, America was producing 50% of the world's manufactured goods. 50% in 1945, with manufacturing jobs making up 35% of the US economy. Today, the US accounts for just 15% of global manufacturing, and China accounts for 32%, and the Chinese are working 7 days a week in many instances. They work 12 hours a day. They work for pennies. Can the US recreate those conditions now in the US? Of course they can. Nobody would work for that. You've got people who are complaining working for minimum wage. And like I said, the real minimum wage has absolutely collapsed. So, no, it's not going to happen. Similarly, the US doesn't have the cost base. They cannot get the raw materials that cheaply. So the idea that America is going to bring back manufacturing and industry is a lie. What America is actually doing is preparing for the post-collapse world, and that is what's coming next. Bretton Woods 2.0 will happen at the depths of the Great Depression 2.0, and America is now trying to get the assets it needs, the commodities it needs to survive the coming depression. But that ain't for you. That's for the people at the top. Let's move on. 1945 to 1971, America ran trade surpluses with the rest of the world. Today, the US has chronic trade deficits. Their current account deficit was 1.12 trillion in 2025, which is equal to 3.6% of GDP. Like I said, America is the largest debtor nation on planet Earth. Let's go on to production economy to financialized casino. The American economy was led by domestic industry in 1945, and it was making real stuff. Today, America makes derivatives. It makes Wall Street rich. It makes traders rich. It makes the people who turn digits into digits rich. Who it doesn't make rich are the farmers, the loggers, the people working in the real economy. Those people are on subsistence wages. Just think about that, my friends. The people who produce the things that the rest of society needs to survive, the things that nobody can live without, the people who plant and grow food, the people who log, the people who mine, those people are the worst paid in society. And you've got people who literally do nothing but turn digits into digits, game the system, front run tweets by having insider information, and that includes the politicians, by the way. Those people earn the most in society. That is a satanic inversion, and that's what's happened since gold was taken out of the system in 1971, at which point it should have been aware to everyone. Everyone should have been aware that the parasitical bankers had absolutely captured the US, and of course, since that time, well, you can see what happened. Now let's talk about the savings rate in the US. In 1945, the savings rate in America was 20% or more. Household debt to income ratios were only 30%. Today, the personal savings rate is under 4%. People have nothing. Like I said, over 50% of Americans have less than a month's salary in the bank. And right now, Americans are drawing down their 401ks at a rate never seen before simply to pay the bills. Now let's talk about the housing bubble, because yes, the housing bubble has been reflated and is actually worse than it was going into 2008, which was a pretty bad housing bubble. You had people who were working in strip clubs, literally, who had 5 houses on the go too, because they was giving a mortgage to anyone. All you had to do was use a thong as a down payment and you got a mortgage, and they was using those thongs and getting 5, 6 houses. Today, the housing bubble is way worse. Look at California, for example. The average house price in California right now is around $1 million for a home, and the average salary is around $100,000. So that is worse than it was going into the GFC, when it had hit a peak of around 5, 6 times the average salary. So the housing bubble is even worse. And again, housing is not meant to be a speculative asset. It's something that everybody needs to survive. That they've turned it into a speculative asset. Well, what's going to happen when we see the Great Depression ensue? Let's now go to demographics. After the Second World War, you had a young and expanding workforce rising beneath the system. That was why America was prosperous. You had less old people, more young people. Children under 18 comprised 31% of the population, whilst seniors only made up 8%, or 1 in 12 people in the US population. Today, seniors are the fastest growing demographic, representing around 20% of the total population, growing at a rate of 1% per year. Now remember, Social Security is due to run out in 2030. That's 4 years' time. You've got unfunded liabilities over 150 trillion. Some people say it's 200 trillion. Let's talk about social cohesion. The post World War II society was a high trust society. You had people going to church, you had neighborhoods, you had face to face social interactions. Roughly 75% of Americans still regularly attended a church. Today, social isolation and loneliness are widespread. 1 in 3 adults report feeling lonely, and 1 in 4 report lacking social and emotional support. How is that possible in America? Well, of course, it's because most people are leading insular lives. They spend their lives in screens, they work so damn hard, they don't have time to see other people. Regular church attendance is below 30%. That means people have no moral guidance, and that's why we've got young people growing up to hate the US. Young people literally hate the country that they are in, and this is intentional. That's why you've got this intergenerational conflict. And I don't think those young people are going to give two hoots about the boomers when they lose their retirement accounts. In fact, I think they'll cheer it on, especially if it's framed as a bailout for the young people. They'll say, okay, we've had this collapse, but it's the young people's turn now. The old people, you've just got to deal with it. You had your time, and the boomers will not be saved in this. They will not be rescued. Their retirement accounts, in my opinion, their bank deposits will disappear unless they have converted it to real wealth before the collapse comes. And of course, we've got the great taking to contend with. So if they've got a retirement account of 10 million, it doesn't matter if those assets get taken during the reset. And I think that's what's going to happen personally. Health outcomes in America today, over 70% of Americans are overweight or obese. Over 70% of Americans. Go back to the mid-century, less than 10% of Americans were classed as obese. Now let's talk about violent crime in the US. This statistic is very sobering. We are seeing a shocking increase in violent crime in the US, and it's been increasing for over 50 years. So in 1945, the violent crime rate in the US was 4 violent crimes per 100,000 people. What do you think it is today? 10? 15? 100? Try 350 per 100,000. Yes, my friends, violent crime rate is closer to 350 per 100,000 people. That is a catastrophic increase in violent crime. Now, I'm going to end it there for my statistics. That was just a small number of them that I put into my article, so please go check that out. But my point is, the narrative you've been given about the US, that Trump and his team are here for Main Street, I have clearly just dismantled that. And there are many reasons, structural reasons related to the catastrophic growth of the debt Ponzi scheme as to why America cannot be revived. What America is going to face is the Great Depression 2.0. We all are, and maybe in that Great Depression 2.0, certain factions of America do better than other places, but I actually don't think so. I think American society is so atomized. People are so angry that we may actually see the long since prophesized civil war. Now, of course, it's not going to be a civil war like what we saw in the early part of America's history. It's going to be something more like people getting very angry and looking for somebody to blame. Now, I think we know who's to blame, but those people are insulated. They are not going to see the anger, so it's going to be turned inwards on society. So I think that's a good place to leave it, my friends, on that bombshell. But if you would like to get yourselves better prepared, there are things you can be doing. I'm writing about it on my Substack, showing what we're doing over here on the farm, so you can find that by following the link in the description. As always, I would love to hear your comments as to what you think about this shocking information, these statistics that really show the state of decline of America that isn't going to be reversed, my friends, unfortunately. So take emergency evasive action now. Let me know in the comment section what you think. As always, take care of yourselves. Have a great weekend, and I will see you in the next one.